Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
A couple of years ago, I did a little study in the Pastoral Epistles. Okay, First, Second Timothy, and Titus.
Yeah.
And those are the three New Testament books that talk about the qualities of leadership in the local church. Whether it's with a deacon or an elder. And I listed between the three books, there's 44 qualities. Now, again, some of those overlap. Okay, and so it's not like 44 distinct ones, but it's 44 words. And out of those 44, only 2 of those deal with competencies.
Oh, really?
In terms of leadership, you have to be able to teach the word well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And manage God's household well.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it is all character.
Wow.
In other words, out of those 42 qualities, only 2 deal with competencies or skills that we need to have. The rest is all character. And even those competencies or skills are always ministered through the lens of the character of who we are.
Yeah.
That character is really critical in God's eyes.
Yeah.
So that's that, spirit of wisdom again, that, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. And so again, that idea that, hey, I stand pretty small before this great God. And that keeps me humble, that places a focus on character rather than my abilities to do things.
Well, yeah. And I love the idea that you're saying, even in writing the book, you're learning things as you're writing it. Because you could say, I'm the author, I'm the teacher, I'm share with you some of the wisdom I've got. But the ability of saying, I learned things about myself confessionally, even as I'm writing this. That's the whole idea. And it's in your book about being a lifelong learner, which is it's actually so tied up with the navigators and the whole idea of discipleship. And I think about, my own family connections with my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and staff, the navigators. Yeah. Just great examples of being lifelong learners as a key element. But I don't want to lose this train of thought on what you just talked about experiential learning and observations, because I loved, and one of the big things I flagged to talk to you about, that you were quoting from Proverbs 24.
And
I've said, if my kids listen to this podcast, they'll recognize, because I quoted this to them so many times.
Really?
And I thought about this passage since I was in high school, before you and I met, Bill. And for the exact notion you bring it up, which is it's observational wisdom. He says, I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. This is Proverbs 24, verses 30 to 34. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. It's observational wisdom. And that, you call it, it's in your heading is a pathway for lifelong learning.
Yes.
I love, like I said, my kids all start laughing as they listen to this. So I say, that's one Dad quotes to us all the time. But someone just looking at life and observing it and gaining wisdom from that.
Yes. And that is a radical idea in the sense of that our culture does not encourage us to stop, because you have the sense in that passage that he's stopping, because he says, I considered what I saw, which means I'm stopping to explore it.
Right.
And our culture wants to move us on. And everything in our culture is built for speed. And there's been documentation and it's an excellent book by Carr on the Shallows by Michael Carr, and he's done extensive research. He's not an old curmudgeon like me, but he's a guy that regularly uses social media, heavily engaged in it. But he's saying the bottom line of social media is that it is teaching people, it's teaching people to keep moving fast so that they cannot slow down and to think in deep ways. It's robbing people of the ability to pay attention and to think deeply. And so that, now again, he's documenting this from research, etc. He's just not an old guy that's complaining about stuff. And there is research. We were talking earlier about the Atlantic Monthly, and they had an article there several years ago on again, the algorithms that's used in all of your major websites, and it's feeding upon our everybody's curiosity, insatiable for the next new thing. And to I mean, they have built the algorithms that built the slot machines in Las Vegas have been the same ones that built social media. And
is that right?
yes, and it is, and so it's sucking us in, and so that we don't stop to think.
Mm.
And so that stopping to think is becoming more and more of a countercultural experience. I mean, they had a major article, boy, was it in the New York Times last week about teachers lamenting the ability to assign college students the ability to read books in college. They can't assign students to read books.
Because they won't sit long enough to
They
read
won't
through.
sit long enough to pay attention to it. And that what it's like on my blog, I asked the guy who helped me to develop it, and I said, well, should I be concerned about how long it is? He says, no, you don't be concerned about length because people are only going to skim it and
Yeah.
they're only going to look for the highlighted portions.
What's that?
It can be as long as you want.
Yeah, right.
They skim it. Now I'm getting off track, but the point is that to be a lifelong learner means that I need to stop and slow down and think
Yeah.
about what am I learning? Like our conversation a couple of months ago in that restaurant where you made that statement about, boy, this, the most important question is the second question. I've been thinking about that for 2 months now. I thought it's a great way of stating it. But see, it's stopping and thinking about a conversation I had with somebody and what can I learn from that conversation instead of going on to the next conversation and the next and the next. And so lifelong learners stop and think about those conversations. Not everyone, but there are significant ones that often happen in a day or maybe in a week, and maybe it's with my spouse, coworker, whatever it might be, that it's kind of like the Spirit of God catches my attention and I need to say, I'm going to stop and think about that.
Yeah.
See what I can learn. What's a lesson that God has for me in this?
I think in the book you use the word loitering, right?
Yes.
Loitering.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, when I read that in our company, we have, a lot of times we have meetings to talk about things. And all the younger people sometimes say, this is really a waste of time. Why are we meeting all the time?
Yeah.
And a couple of us in leadership positions, as a woman, the president of our bank, she said, look, this is, and she coined this term, very consistent with her concept of loitering. She says, this is the lazy river of management. We need to have these conversations. We need to have slow, quiet conversations where we dwell on things, you just mull over things, chew on things, and take the time. And it's a message almost to say, I know it's frustrating for you. You think, you got to get your other work done, this committee. Why am I on this committee? Or why am I on this meeting? But this is how we move forward.
Yes.
Lazy river of thought, which is I wrote in the margin as I was reading your book, like when you talk about loitering, that's the same idea. Like and I could see it. This my kids talk about doom scrolling on TikTok or Instagram, one video to the next, and it's you're right. It's a way of thought.
That's a great word picture. I'm going to steal that one. The lazy river of thought.
Lazy river of thought. Yes. It's great. It's great.
It's a great word picture. Yeah. And we need some of those.
Yeah.
Before the rapids hit.
Yeah. It's like, when we had dinner together, lunch had turned into dinner, like a couple hours. It's a lazy river of thought, is spending time that way. And our culture doesn't allow for a lot of that. And it's a challenge in leadership. There's all those tennis balls coming at you so quick.
Yes.
You can't pause to think and get a grip. So anyway, so let me just say that the diagram, the main diagram in the book, you have wisdom in the center, lifelong learning. We've been talking about that at the top of the 12 o'clock position. And then at 3 o'clock, there's collaboration, working with others. That's a little bit of lazy river. We're already touching on some of these things. At the 6 o'clock position, you've got cultural wisdom. Want to talk about that. And then the left side, you have innovation. Oh, before we get to cultural wisdom, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I think I'm wondering if I'm in this book, because on the chapter on innovation, you talk about someone who gave you an NCR computer, and my brother gave for NCR at the time, and then someone else who showed up with a Mac, an early Apple Mac, and I had an early Apple Mac, and I remember working on that. And I'm wondering if I'm the guy, or maybe I'm not. Maybe it's somebody else.
No, you're not. But I use you in another illustration, Jim. Only it's not in the book.
Okay.
And well, I just thought this was one of the most innovative things. When we were in campus ministry, we sponsored a dinner theater.
Mm.
And you and Gary, I forget, we won't
Gary
don't know
Baldoff. I
his
remember
name.
this one. Yeah.
And you guys put together that little two-person dialogue. And I thought that's the most, I still remember this thing.
You remember it better than I do when you were telling me about it again.
I know. And do you want me to, or?
Yeah, sure. It was
Yeah. Well, you were two best friends in college and you decide to meet every year after college. Well, I think maybe every couple of years, but anyhow, you set up a regular time to meet. And so, the little two-act play was, you meet the first couple of years, everything's going okay. Meet the next couple of years, and one of the guys said that, boy, I've had some test results, just haven't been feeling well. And the next couple of years, you come back again. Now, again, this is in the 1980s.
yeah.
What was a big health issue in the 1980s? It was
AIDS.
AIDS.
Right.
And so, about the third or fourth time, the one guy comes back, and I think it was you, says, well, I found out I have AIDS. I caught it through a blood transfusion. And you talk about this, and the next scene is, well, you don't show up. And I thought, what a dramatic, and then it's kind of, okay, how do we weave the gospel into what just happened here?
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a creative way without over sentiment, how to being overly sentimental or magnifying it out of proportion. You know what I mean? That
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it was is because I could picture two friends doing this and meeting, and I thought, what a creative way to bring the gospel into a setting. And so that's that spirit of innovation and this is what's really helped me. And actually, Steve Jobs was really helpful on this because Jobs talked about he wants to take the function of a computer and he says, how do you marry aesthetics, something beautiful, to function, what something does? And so that, I think oftentimes in the church, we stay with the same function, like worship service. We just stay, okay, we got a function, it's to meet with God, worship Him, praise, etc., etc. But the form can change at times. And what we don't want to do is change the forms. And so we get stuck, we get married to a certain form. Or the other thing that happens is so change everything, we would toss out the original function of it. But I think as Christians, we need to be thinking about, boy, we have an established biblical function, as it were, goal, vision, whatever, but that can take a variety of forms. How do we
Yeah.
marry something beautiful, which God wants to do? Think about it. He could have created an entirely brown world. He could have created
Right.
a brown world. Everything looks the same. He could have created you and me as everybody looks the same.
Yeah.
Could have created us without scent. We can't smell anything. He could have
Right.
created us without taste buds, but we got some like 10,000 taste buds to sample things with. He could have done that, but he didn't. He gave us taste buds, he gave us beauty, gave us color. And so it tells us something about the creator. Why don't we bring those things into how do we marry the aesthetics of the creator to the functions that we do in ministry? And I realize I'm going off here a little bit, but that's a thrust of that chapter. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of times, quite frankly, I think the church kind of lives in 1950s black and white TV when we could
Mm-hmm.
be living in a high definition flat screen TV.
Well, I love that. And I think there are people think about innovative ways to reach people for Christ, innovative ways to teach the gospel while still staying true to the core truths of
Yes.
the word,
Yes.
right? So not sacrificing, not going into error or heresy, but really
Yes.
but saying the ways you reached people, you know, 20, 30 years ago, just maybe not going to
Yes.
work the same
Yeah.
today. But there was a part in that chapter you talked about surrender. And I really like that.
Yes. Yes.
This idea
Yeah.
to be innovative. I think let me see if I got it, Bill. It's the idea that if you want to be innovative, you've got to be willing to kind of surrender your desire for control or your desire to be, I'm in charge, I'm the leader, I know best. This notion of
Yes.
like, subjugating your ego and
Yes.
or pride to say, I need others and I can really learn from others.
Yes.
Opens
Well,
it.
I think that's a little bit more, Jim, in the chapter on um collaboration because
Oh, I thought, okay. Yes,
yeah,
that makes
because
sense.
what
But yeah.
yeah, because I think what I've seen in collaboration is we usually end up either coordination or cooperation, as I call it. Collaboration to me is the idea that I'm facing a challenge so big, I don't know what's the best way to go about this. So I need to bring others in, and together we come up with something. And so, in one sense, we start with a blank piece of paper. And then we trust in Romans 4:17, describing Abraham, that Abraham believed God, and that he believed that God could raise, oh, how's it say that? I used to have this memorized. Yeah, could raise from the dead or call into existence of things that do not exist. And so again, it's a picture of Abraham. And when Abraham's offering up Isaac, he's got, out of obedience, he's got to trust God for two things. That God, because the promise is in Isaac. Do away with Isaac. There's no promise. Promise is in the son. The covenant promise in the son. And so that Abraham has to believe that God's going to either raise Isaac from the dead, or he's going to create something that doesn't exist. And what does he do? He finds a ram in the thicket, something that didn't exist. And so that in collaboration together, we're believing God to create something that doesn't exist. And so that I've got to surrender then my preferences and so on ahead of time. And not that those are all bad or wrong, but I'm not coming in to sell those or to make a situation where it lives out my preferences. That together we're starting with this blank piece of paper and saying, Lord, we want to together create something that doesn't exist.
Wow.
That's a true spirit of collaboration. And then again, and so that the leader then in collaboration is, they're kind of ruthless about the process. We're going to go through a process here to get to someplace, but I'm hands off on the outcome. We're trusting God what the outcome will be.
Wow.
So it doesn't mean there's not leadership given. The leadership is about the process.
Yeah.
But the leadership is saying, I've got my hands off on the outcome.
Yeah.
Because together we're believing God to create something that doesn't exist.
Bill, I've thought about that thought for decades. This idea, like, I need to be faithful in the process, but trust God for outcomes, not be so wedded to outcomes that I'm disappointed with God because he was going to make this successful. He was going to do. I mean, like, Lord, the outcomes are up to you. I need to be faithful in the process. I'll do what I need to do. But you've taken that, kind of applied that to this collaboration idea and leadership. I really love that.
Yeah. Well, I think most people don't like collaboration. Well, one is that it's one form of leadership. It's not the form of leadership. And I talk in the book about, if certain conditions are present, then probably collaborative leadership is the best leadership that's needed. So like in the military, if we're taking this hill, I'm not going to ask the guy, well, guys, which way do you think,
Right. Let's all come together. And
we just need to go, but there's some cases where we don't know what's the best thing to do. And let's think together about what's the best thing to do.
Yeah.
So that's collaborative leadership. And I think with most people see that as we never get anything done. It's endless conversations. You know how that goes. And
but it's
one more committee meeting.
But I love what you're saying here. That look, this is part of the wisdom of leadership. There are times you say, guys, I know you may not understand why, you may understand, how we got here, but we're taking that hill. Let's go.
That's right.
And you trust me, we just got to go. That's the one type of leadership. But it's not universal. It's not something you do in every situation. Sometimes you say, it's not clear. Do we take this hill or that hill? And then, in the abundance of counselors, there is wisdom. You say, let's get the collective wisdom from the people that you're leading. But the notion that is a little bit revolutionary to me here, that I'm thinking that is news, is you're creating something out of nothing. The collaboration that you said is like creating something out of nothing. Because if you work for me, I'm a leader, and I say, well, Bill, what's your idea? And I say, that's nice, Bill, but we're not taking that today. We're taking Sally's idea because she's smart. We're taking her idea.
Yeah.
I'm just choosing those ideas from this different people. You get the suggestion box, give me the ideas. Sally wins. We're going her way.
Yes.
Okay. You felt like you had some input, but you didn't work at it. But if the collaboration is like creating a new entity out of something that wasn't there before, thinking of it that way that's really powerful, Bill. That's very different.
Yeah, it is. And there's nothing wrong with the other approach, as long as
at different times
about it, and to me, that's where cooperation and coordination come into play. But collaboration to me is something a little bit different. And like, for example, I've got a responsibility in my local church of developing this ministry to seniors. Kind of one doesn't exist. And so to some degree, we're creating something out of, we don't know what a good senior ministry looks like, but we're kind of creating one, together as a team. And people aren't used to, I think sometimes in churches, Jim, what happens, and it happens in any organization, is that sometimes we end up treating people as employees and not partners. Sometimes, particularly in volunteer organizations, we can say, your job, Jim, is to make sure that the ushers are trained and they're greeting people every week. And so that's your job. So it's kind of like you're an employee,
right.
But a partnership says, well, Jim, we want to create a welcoming atmosphere at our church. How do you think we can help our ushers create a welcoming atmosphere in our church? So now you're a partner. So how are you thinking with me and how we could create a welcoming atmosphere in our church? You're now a partner in it rather than I've assigned you a task to do. Now there's a place for assigned tasks, but I think particularly in the church too often we focus on the assigned task. And so people become employees rather than partners, and not an abusive way, but there's a subtlety there. And not inviting them into the process to shape it together. That's
so Bill,
what
let me go on a riff on this. It's not, I don't think it's in your book. It's not in mine, but it's a thought I've had for a long time since I was practicing law in New York. And I've called it the line of inclusion.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's very much in tune with what you're saying. But what I remember once I was with another associate at the law firm, and he came in my office and he was just like, his face was just falling, heartbroken. I said, what happened? He said, they asked me to leave. I said, what do you mean? He said, been working on this deal for months. I've been working on this with doing other contracts, the documents, the merger agreements, all the rest. Finally got in this room where we're going to hash it out and really negotiate this deal. And the senior partner looked at me and said, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And asked me to step out of the room so they could, the big dogs, the partner, they could negotiate everything. And that one, I thought, it really struck me. And I've had many conversations since. I thought at that moment they could pay him double, and he still wanted out.
Yes. Yeah.
He said, "I've had it. I'm out."
Yeah.
And or the contrast is we say, "Hey, we've got this big decision to make, and we're not sure which way to go. Bill, could you come in here a second?"
Yes. Yes.
You come in the room, and I could pay you half.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
The leadership thought, we're not sure which way to go. Bill, we really want to hear what you have to say about this. Come on in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Collaborate with me. Let's work together on this.
Yeah.
That's being in the line of inclusion or not. And when you talked about treating people like employees, that's basically saying that's below the line of inclusion. We, the leadership, we will make decisions here. We may tell you why we're doing it. We may not. Your job as employee, you're below the line of inclusion.
Yes.
Just execute. Just tell the ushers what to do. You don't need to know why. You don't need to understand. Just get it done. Leave the thinking to us. That's below the line of it. So that's my parlance.
No, that is again, that's a great visual that I'm below the line of inclusion. And a lot of times, a lot of people are there. And in some ways, rightly so, certain circumstances dictate that. And as they say, it's above my pay level. And
okay. Right. By the way, some people do want to be below the line. It's like,
that's right. I don't want to.
I work here.
But to me, I think the bottom line issue is, how do I respect you? It's so that I tell you, well, Jim, we feel like these people are more skilled or in a position to perhaps better make this decision. You've given us to this point. Now we need to move it on. See, so I'm respecting you by communicating why I'm not including you in this meeting.
Right.
And you may not agree, but at least it's been explained to you.
Yeah.
To me, that's what respect is. I take the time to explain it to you, and you may not agree, but hey, a lot of times in life we don't agree with one another in a whole variety of things. But at least I've respected you enough. And I think that's what often happens, whether it's in a church or any other organization or workplace, showing that little sense of respect to people. And people respond to, okay, they respect me enough to explain it in person.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.